All right, guys. Most people think health is something that happens to them. You get older, hormones decline, your energy fades, your metabolism slows down. Somewhere along the way, we've just kind of accepted that as just being normal. But what if that's the wrong question entirely? What if the real question isn't like what happens as we age, but what can we actually influence? Today, we're going to dive into one of the most talked about, probably one of the most misunderstood topics in modern health and performance: peptides. So, depending on who you ask, they're either the future of personalized medicine or just another overhyped trend. So, how do you separate the science from the marketing? Well, that's exactly why today's guest is here. Dr. Edwin Spencer isn't just another physician weighing in on the latest health trend. He is a nationally recognized orthopedic surgeon, an award-winning researcher, inventor, educator whose work has been cited dozens of times, peer-reviewed literature. He self-developed surgical technologies still used today. He holds multiple U.S. patents and has built his philosophy around one powerful belief, and that's patients have far more control over their health and longevity than they've been led to believe. Now, through concierge performance medicine, he's helping people optimize everything from hormones and blood markers to VO2 max, strength, long-term vitality, using data, education, and individualized care instead of one-size-fits-all medicine. So today, we're going to cut through the noise. We're going to talk about what peptides actually are, who they may help, what the research really says, and how they fit into the bigger picture of living longer, performing better, and taking ownership of your health. Dr. Spencer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hopefully I can live up to that introduction. That was quite impressive.
All facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we can get into, but first I want you to walk us through your story. You spent years in orthopedic surgery, so what made you want to transition then into performance medicine?
Oh, it's a great question. So I would say about 10 years ago, I really got more interested in the health wellness space, and it wasn't completely altruistic. I really wanted to have the patients perform better, and it didn't take a rocket scientist to kind of look at the patients and see who actually healed better from surgery or from injury. And so then started putting on my website things that people could do. And this is pretty basic stuff. I mean, it's pretty basic nutritional advice as far as higher protein. Then started putting some supplements on there as well, things that they could do to, I mean, you've heard of carb loading, right? Carb loading for surgery actually works as well. And so you start looking at the literature and bringing some other stuff in. Some of the GI guys really got into that and noticed that their anastomoses weren't healing. And that's where you connect like the intestinal tube together. And then they got to thinking about it like, well, why we basically starve our patients for a week, right? We make them NPO and they're nutritionally depleted. Why would we think that they would actually heal? Right. So they started noticing that. And so then that got me thinking a little bit more, why can't we do that in orthopedics and make the patients actually heal better? And that, a long time ago, I stopped operating on smokers and chronic narcotic users. The data is replete with how poorly they do. But then can we take it the next step further and actually take the average Joe and make them a little healthier for surgery and have them perform better? And then took that even to the next level later on with peptides, which we'll talk about today.
All right. So talk to us about just kind of like in general, like traditional healthcare. Like what does it do really well and where are we missing a lot?
Boy. So traditional healthcare tends to be a little bit more on its heels. And part of that is based on how physicians are actually remunerated. So, and that's not to be an indictment of medicine per se, but if you don't get paid to do something, you're probably not going to do it, right? So let me give you an example because this is a great story. I just got done operating on this lady. I think I'd replaced her shoulder. Her husband was a primary care physician and he worked at a local hospital. And so one of the City View magazines that I'd written a health wellness article and was right beside him. He was reading that. And he's like, oh, so you're really into this health wellness stuff? And I'm like, yeah. And so I said, well, how does that work for you guys? Let's say that someone comes in and they're insulin resistant, not quite diabetic, insulin resistant. What do you do? Do you prescribe berberine? Do you talk to them about nutritional stuff? What happens when they become diabetic or pre-diabetic? What do you guys do? What are the metrics and how do you intervene before someone actually becomes diabetic? Oh, he's like, oh, Well, you know, if I find that someone's diabetic and I don't give them metformin, I get personally dinged.
Mm.
Like he gets financially dinged if he doesn't prescribe a medication, as opposed to sitting down and saying, hey, what can we do about your behaviors? What can we do about your nutrition? What can we do maybe from a supplement standpoint before we actually start prescribing medication? So part of it's based on how the system is set up. And in general, most of the system is set up on its heels, not on our toes, forward center of mass, looking for something that could become a problem. Most of the time, most of the labs, the standard labs, like have you guys ever had like an insulin level taken? A fasting insulin level? We get fasting glucose, but have you ever had a fasting insulin?
No.
There you go. So that's how you actually find out if someone's insulin resistant before they become pre-diabetic. That'll be 10 years before they become diabetic. You start becoming insulin resistant. So you can measure the fasting insulin, you can measure the fasting glucose, and then you have a formula to develop what your HOMA-IR is. And so that's your degree of insulin resistance. And your body, your pancreas will be insulin resistant for 10 years or so before you actually become diabetic and actually can see a rise in your hemoglobin A1C. So catching it early on is not something that we typically do. And that's just one case. That's just diabetes, right? So, but I mean, that's close to 50% of the population has some degree of insulin resistance and diabetes, prediabetes, right? So it's a big mover, and it's a big mover when you look at cardiovascular disease and dementia and how it manifests itself in all other metrics or all other systems, I guess.
Yeah, so I feel like it's very reactive. Like you said, they're more so in the management type of thing instead of saying, "Hey, let's really dig deep. What is the root cause here to our issues, and what can we do to either prevent it or prevent going forward?" Type of thing. Instead of almost just like, "Hey, here's a Band-Aid, here's some medicine, here's something that's just going to kind of calm it right now. We'll deal with whatever happens later on in life."
Right. Right. You need to be on your toes, forward center of mass, looking for something, not on your heels reacting. I mean, if you're on your heels, you're going to get pulled from the field pretty quickly, right? The ball's just going to eat you up,
Yeah.
looking at the baseball behind you.
Well, and I think people are starting to be a little more aware of that. And so I think they're asking more questions, especially nowadays with AI. Like there's so much information out there. And it's a positive thing where we have access to that information. But then it can also be very overwhelming because you hear all kinds of information online. You don't know who to trust, what you should be trying. And so I think the peptide thing is becoming more and more in the mainstream. Like I even just saw something on the news the other day, and you can talk about this later if you want, about, I guess, correct me, I don't know as much about this, but the FDA is looking at a few of the peptides out there to decide whether they want to regulate them. And so I don't know, you see more and more about there. And so I really want to get in today. Like, let's talk about some of the more popular ones. I want to hear about if you've tried any peptides, what your experience has been, and what your patient's experience has been, and then talk about, hey, who might actually benefit from some of these.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's kind of take this in a retrograde fashion. We'll save the regulatory for a little bit later because I do want to get into that because there's been some significant movement with the PCAC with the meetings just on the 23rd and 24th. So have I used peptides? Yes. And so I had my knee replaced, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. And so I did a combination of BPC and TB500 a month before and for 3 months afterwards. And then I started on CJC ipamorelin combination at around 6 weeks, 8 weeks out when I could start actually doing some strength training. And I continued that intermittently, continued that out for a year and was really able to recover so much more quickly. Now, here's the problem with our peptide research is that we've got a lot of really good animal studies. We do have some good mechanisms. And so from the animal studies, we can understand some of the mechanisms, but we don't have any significant prospective data. We can break some of the peptides down. Some of them have a little bit more data than others, like the GLPs have a ton of data on them. But it's all anecdotal information like mine. Hey, I did this, and but there's some healthy user bias there, right? I was already in pretty good shape. nutritionally, sleep, exercise, all that stuff. So then that's where I see the peptides are actually beneficial. You can't take someone that's unhealthy and all of a sudden make them healthy with the peptides. There's a lot of intentionality that has to occur with those other pillars. Like I said, the sleep and nutrition and exercise have to be dialed in before you're going to see a huge benefit from the peptides. But from my own personal experience, it worked amazingly well. My son had his ACL reconstructed, and so I put him on the peptides, and he recovered very, very well. And then, so there were a couple of prescribers in town, and I had probably about 15-20% of my post-surgical patients, mainly rotator cuffs, taking peptides, and boy, did they do exceedingly well, to the point where physical therapists are calling, going, "What are you doing differently?" But here again, there's some healthy user bias, because most of those patients that it actually started out with 2 patients that suggested peptides. And I was like, well, yeah, I think it's great. And this is before I actually took them. I said, yeah, let me look into the literature. And so I looked into the literature and talked to a few people. I'm like, yeah, that sounds fantastic. Let's do it. And so they already had some prescribers. And then seeing their results, I started getting more patients on the peptides. Hey, if you're interested in this, these can actually work. And I would send them to these other providers, and they would take care of the peptide. And they were happy to do so, because obviously they're making money then off the peptides and the referrals. But from my standpoint, I was seeing patients actually do really, really well. So that's how most of this is structured. It's all anecdotal data, but it's all pointing in the same direction. And we're not seeing a lot of adverse events or adverse reactions. And so that really pushes the needle in that direction. Let's start doing this a little bit more. So to that end, and I'm not sure how much you want to get into the regulatory part of it, but I've got 2, I guess I'd call them partners. We started something called Open Orthopedic Peptide Network. We've got a website that's not published yet. We're going to have a meeting probably in the next couple of weeks after this PCAC meeting. But what we're doing is creating a national registry where we can get physicians to create a database. My patients are on this, and this at these times from these compounding pharmacies at these doses, and follow them out to look for, number 1, adverse events. Number 2, how efficacious are these peptides at getting to our end metric, which is probably return to sport. Obviously healing, which is going to be encompassed in that return to sport. But we've got a lot of patient-recorded outcome measures that we'd be able to follow. So we're starting to do that right now to create this national registry, because there's really not an impetus for any peptide-making company to do any research, because what would help them is going to help everybody else, right? They're not going to be the only place making BPC. It's not going to be a patentable thing. So why would you do any research on that, right? If you've got to fund it personally.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think from the regulatory standpoint, as a trainer and thinking about my clients, and as we thinking about our team and our team of clients, what type of peptides would be probably most of value to our clients, and then as well as just the average person who's out there who starts hearing more about this and says, yeah, you know what, I'm kind of interested in taking this. Where do I start? Which ones would be best for me? How do I know? And how do I feel comfortable that this is going to be safe for me?
Yeah, great questions. So BPC 157 is probably the most popular peptide. It's been around quite some time. So it was actually in 1993, I think that's when they actually discovered that molecule. So BPC 157 is actually just a 15 amino acid peptide that was from the bigger compound, body protection compound. And it's interesting. So this is how it was found. So this is from gastric juice, right? And the gastric juice in the stomach, the pH is 2, right? It's very acidic environment. We've got all the pepsin and all these proteases in there to chew up meat, kill bacteria, that sort of thing. And yet the stomach it survives without ulcers most of the time, right? So then a group in Croatia started thinking about, well, there's got to be some molecules in there that are helping the stomach to actually withstand that kind of environment. And then they finally, I think it was in the late 80s, when they isolated body protection compound from gastric juices, and then isolated the 15 amino acid segment that really seemed to be the one that allowed for that that improvement in the gastric health to occur. And what it seems to do, and again, you'd think we'd have more mechanism of action right now, but what it seems to do is increase your body's ability to make blood vessels. So it increases something called VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. So that allows the stomach lining to reproduce itself much more quickly by increasing the blood flow. So then that group has done a lot of mechanistic studies with mice. And so the one that we kind of point to the most is where they transected a ligament, actually, and then they had these mice either drink BPC or they would inject it into their abdomens peritoneally or nothing, and they found that those BPC mice actually healed much more quickly. There's really only one orthopedic paper on this, and the study wasn't the most well-performed study, but they injected it inside the knee, and about 90% of people got better. But I think it was only like 20 patients in the study, and some of it was arthritis, some of it was a meniscal tear, I'm sure, but it wasn't the greatest. It wasn't constructed. The study wasn't constructed in the best way, so we don't have any randomized controlled trials, but from a healing standpoint, BPC really seems to be something that really, really works. And you can use that in combination with TB500. Is that something you guys have heard of? That's called the Wolverine stack. Mackenzie, you've heard of that?
Yeah, I've just heard the name thrown around a lot.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I didn't realize what the TB500, but when you said Wolverine stack, I have heard of the Wolverine stack.
Okay.
It's just because it sounds really cool. I'm like,
Right.
oh, dude, Wolverine, let's go, man.
Yeah. So the TB500 is actually a fragment of something called thymosin beta 4. So thymosin fraction 5 was found in a lab, I think it was in the 80s. And again, we're looking for ways, it was actually looking for ways to boost the immune system because they're looking at the thymus, and they found that this thymosin beta 4, of which there's some really good data. Again, these are animal studies, but it seems to improve cell migration. So cells, people probably don't realize this. Cells migrate. You have to have cells like for healing. If I take a step back, let's say that you tear your MCL. You're going to get some bleeding there. You're going to get inflammation. That's the first week. And then the next phase is proliferation. And then comes the remodeling phase, which will be months and months. So you have to have cells migrate there. And they migrate through the stuff called actin and myosin. There's a little exoskeleton there. This TB500 and thymosin beta 4 promotes the better aggregation and use of that actin. So the cells are almost move like on tracks, like let's see, like a skid steer. The tracks on like a skid steer or something like that. Yeah. So they lay down actin, and then the myosin will pull the cell along. So that's how the cells migrate. So it increases the migration. So the combination of the TB500 and BPC, you're getting more blood flow and you're getting the cells there. And that really improves musculoskeletal healing, especially like in chronic. Have you guys ever had any chronic tendon or ligament tears, injuries like that?
No, I've never had any like tears or anything super serious like that. No. It's always been minor stuff, but
minor stuff. Well,
I've had some shoulder issue. I mean, I saw you with that little shoulder issue that went away, but nothing serious now.
Yeah. So here's one of the problems that we face in orthopedics is that the blood supply to tendons and ligaments and cartilage really isn't that good. If you think about a tendon, it connects muscle to bone, right? It gets its blood supply both from the bone on one end and the muscle on the other end, and there's some smaller vessels. But there's a watershed area in between where you don't get much blood supply. So if you imagine having a small tear in a tendon and not actually getting much of a reaction from the blood. You don't tear a vessel, so there's not much bleeding there. And we can get into biologics later, but so you don't get many platelets there, you don't get a stimulus for healing. So you can imagine then if you take a rope and you dangle a weight off of it and you cut some of the fibers, more loads can be borne by those other fibers. And so you have a tendency for those to tear more, right? Especially if you don't heal it. But if you can increase the blood flow through an angiogenesis through BPC, or increase the migration of cells there through TB500, you might be able to get that to heal better. And that's what it looks like in animal studies. And that's what I've seen clinically too.
So they call it the Wolverine because it's almost like a super fast, impactful recovery, like superheroes type stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It can. It can. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in just countless patients, and to the point you're like, this doesn't seem to be real, but it is.
Yeah, that's super cool. And you mentioned a lot of this with like surgeries or tears or major injuries. What about more like smaller, like Lawrence was saying, like just little shorter pains, or like we have a lot of clients who have normal aches and pains or just general fatigue. Does it impact stuff like that, or where do you see it playing a role for more like generalized people?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the issue, but if you do have like a small tear of, say, you got a partial rotator cuff tear or something like that, yeah, I could see it being very beneficial for that. Probably isn't going to affect you from a fatigue standpoint. That's going to be more mitochondrial based, maybe NMN supplementation, things like that. So that's going to be a little different space than is this regenerative space. But I think that's where I see a lot of people taking BPC is, oh, I've got a little bit of back pain. I want to try to get that better without knowing exactly what the back pain's coming from. So that cohort's going to be a little bit more difficult to follow or glean some data off of, because it's so it could be from multiple different things, right? But I have anecdotally heard that a lot of patients have gotten better with BPC when they've had a little bit of back pain, a little bit of shoulder pain, a little bit of neck pain. And I don't see, the thing is, I just don't really see that much downside. However, you may not be getting to one of your questions, Lawrence, or what are you actually getting when that vial comes in, right? That's a huge question.
Yeah.
So if you want to launch into a little bit of the regulatory stuff, this is the stuff that the more I researched it, the more disappointed I got. So, which is disappointing a little bit. But, and I don't want to give a plug for a certain website or anything, but here's kind of how this happened back in 2015. All these peptides were submitted to the FDA so they could get categorized on this bulk list. And so category 1 means thumbs up, you can produce it, not a problem. Category 2 means you can't, that the FDA feels that there's probably too many adverse events. And so for 8 years, these peptides sat in limbo, nothing happened. And then September of 23, they said, oh, no, all these things are going on category 2. And that's when you saw this huge rise for research use only, not for animal or human consumption. It became very clear that this was a huge gray market. So if you knew a compounding pharmacy and knew it well and knew that they were doing it well, and you work with a practitioner that knows that compounding pharmacy, I think it's safe. But all these places online aren't even compounding pharmacies, right? So how do you know if it's pure or not? Well, this group created a website. It's called finric.com, and they crowdsource peptides. So you could send them a peptide and they'll test it for you. And so they have 3 labs that they send it to. And if you go to their site, they'll have, you can sign up as a client, which is how they make money. This is a for-profit type of deal. But they'll say, BPC, we tested 15 samples from site X. And their purity, they rate them on purities. I think 6 points for purity, 2 points if it's got some impurities, and then 2 points for how it's labeled. And so then it gives it a grade. And so you can at least get some idea of whether this is a good peptide of what you're getting. Some of them, if you look at CJC, it seemed like most of the places they tested, they had 50% purity. Oh, wow. So you may not be getting what you think you're getting. There's the danger. There's the real danger. And you may be getting impurities like lipopolysaccharides, bacterial components inside there as well. So you got to be really careful. So if you're interested in doing peptides, I would say get in touch with a practitioner that's familiar with compounding pharmacies, where you can at least know what you're getting. And it's still kind of a gray area right now. We can get into more of the regulatory, but it may be a little boring for some of your audience. I don't know.
Well, I want to go back a little bit too. When you remember when creatine first came out, like years ago, right? I remember, so I was a big like muscle and fitness magazine guy. And this was probably like when I was like 16 years old. And I pretty much, anything they told me to do, I was like, I'm on it. I'm trying this. And I remember there's an article on creatine. They're like, you'll gain 5 to 10 pounds of muscle. And I was like, I'm on it. And I remember my mom was like, what are you doing? Like I've never heard of this thing. There's like no research on it. She's like, okay, fine. Do whatever you want. If you die, you die. She's just like that type of personality. And of course, 16, I was like, yeah, Mom, I guarantee you it's good stuff. And it ended up working out. Creatine is like one of the most studied, researched supplement out there, and there's been tons of positive research. But and I'm also the type of guy, and I think there's a lot of, especially you talk about the healthy user bias. I think a lot of people, when they start becoming healthier, they get super excited about optimizing their health, right? And so one thing I want to think about is like that risk versus reward, right? So if I'm sitting here and I'm like, there's nothing really bothersome to me that I'm like, I really need to take a peptide to do this, but I get excited about it. I hear it, I'm like, ooh, that sounds really cool. That's a cool sounding name type of thing. Like where should be my thought process of, okay, like what's the risk versus the reward? What's my return on investment type of thing?
Mm-hmm.
And where should I kind of go from there?
Yeah. In life, most of the time, there are no solutions, only trade-offs, right? I think that was Thomas Sowell that said that. But so you do have to look at the risk, benefit, reward. And honestly, creatine's been so well studied and it has so many positive benefits. It's basically just it's an energy transfer. It increases your ATP, it increases your energy. It's like the first 20 seconds of your burn when you start an exercise or working out. But for peptides, I do think that there does have to be an end goal for you. So Mackenzie, to your point, if you've got some back pain or shoulder pain or whatever, you test it for a month or two and see if it's actually helping. But there are other goals. Obviously, the GLP-1s, it's going to typically be weight loss, although the GLP-1s have remarkably decreased inflammation, irrespective of the weight loss. They will decrease your CRP and all these other inflammatory mediators, IL-6, things like that. So, I mean, I think you have to be scientific about it. And I like to do that as well. If I'm starting a supplement, I'm going to start one, I'm going to test it and see what happens over the next month or two. Do I really feel any more energy? Am I gaining any muscle mass? Am I losing any fat? Whatever I'm looking at, better sleep, whatever it happens to be. But you have to kind of be scientific with yourself about those things. And you have to look at the downside. So getting these peptides online without actually knowing what you're getting, I think there's some significant potential downside there. And you have to take that into account. And I think that one website, Fenric, I think at least they're trying. It depends on how good their labs are, but at least they're trying to make them a little bit safer. And some people honestly just want to gain some muscle mass. And that's where the growth hormones, secretagogues, have really gained a lot of, like testosterone, sermorelin, CJC, all that stuff has gained a lot of interest, because if you can, like when you were 16 and you wanted to gain muscle mass and someone's telling you, hey, you can take CJC and you can really gain a lot of lean muscle mass, what guy isn't going to say, yeah, I would love that? What guy or gal is going to be like, oh, it's like telling a golfer, hey, I can improve your drive by 20 yards. Who's not going to sign up for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things with the GLPs, the promise that, oh, you can lose weight. And a lot of people, and unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people are looking at it more like that magic pill, right? And I'm afraid they're going to do the same thing with the peptide. Like, I don't really have to work out. I can take this magic pill that helps me to lose weight. And yes, it's going to have some benefit, but if you don't use it correctly, if you don't have someone on your side, on your team to guide you and lead you in the right direction and have the right knowledge for that, then it's going to end up wasting time, energy, money, and they're going to end up not getting the results that they want. Or they're going to get some results and it's going to be very temporary and they're going to gain it all back.
Yeah, there's a significant amount of rebound weight gain after you get done with the GLPs. And you're hinting around exactly what is true, which is the behavior has to change. So your nutrition has to change. I saw plenty, like when they first started, I saw plenty of people, especially nurses and some of them in our surgery center, you look at them like, oh my gosh, you look terrible. I mean, you've lost a lot of weight, but I mean, there's zero muscle mass. And you would see people all around like that. It's like the muscle just melted off of them. Everything melted off of them. So if you're not doing resistance training, I know some people that are combining some of the GLP-1s, even with the growth hormone secretagogues, to try to prevent that muscle mass loss. But honestly, all you have to do is some resistance training and you can combat that. But that, again, is a behavior change. And so it's not just GLP-1. And I used to have such a negative view of the GLP-1s that just eat better and exercise and you'll lose weight. Some people are so far over the edge though that they can't. And so I'm totally on board with those guys being on a GLP-1. And now there's sufficient data to show that it reduces inflammation so much. It reduces cardiac events irrespective of weight loss. And so being on a low dose GLP-1 may be a really, really good thing to do. And again, on a really low dose, to your point about the risk benefit analysis, there doesn't seem to be, especially on a really low dose, there doesn't really seem to be a negative effect. So for those that have increased systemic inflammation from whatever source, whether it's leaky gut or some insulin resistance, getting on that I think as a bridge is what you're saying, as a bridge to getting better nutrition, better sleep, better exercise. I think that that's a very reasonable thing to do, but you're right. I think it has to be a team approach where you're not just relying on this. I mean, there's MOTS-c is another peptide. It's some people have called it like exercise in a pill, although it's an injectable form. And there's another peptide that's very similar to it, and it increases mitochondrial function. And so in mouse studies, they would feed these mice a high fat diet, and the controls would just they would get obese, they would get diabetes, and that was the model. They gave them this MOTS-c. They didn't get fat. They didn't get diabetes. And so that's where people are like, oh my gosh, this is like exercise in a injection. To some degree it is, but there's no substitute. There is really, really no substitute for exercise and nutrition. These things are just additive. Like I said, they can be used as a bridge. I don't personally take any of them right now because I don't need to. It's like you, Lawrence. I mean, what goal am I trying to achieve? I'm not training for anything particular anymore, So and I don't have a surgery that I'm recovering from. So why would I take anything at this point?
So yeah, what are some, I know you mentioned MOTS-c, what are some of the other popular peptides out there that people are talking about or that you've seen have provided impact for people?
The growth hormone secretagogues are the ones that really, and we can talk about the GLP-1s as a separate deal, but the growth hormone secretagogues like tesamorelin, sermorelin, CJC 1295, let me tell you a little bit about how those work, because it's different and some of it is physiologically better for you than others. So, and not to get too sciencey, but the hypothalamus sends these signals to the pituitary, and the pituitary will secrete growth hormone. So growth hormone releasing hormone secreted by the hypothalamus to the pituitary makes growth hormone. Well, tesamorelin and sermorelin and CJC will increase how much of the growth hormone releasing hormone, it actually binds to that receptor in the pituitary. So it increases how much growth hormone is released. Now, typically growth hormone goes through multiple spikes, just like testosterone does during the day. All right. Biggest growth hormone spike occurs at night, which is why you take these medications as an injection at night. But it keeps your same negative feedback loop. So unlike taking exogenous testosterone, there is no, you kind of dampen the feedback loop there because you're taking the end product. But if you're taking a medication that increases the release of growth hormone, but keep the negative feedback loop. So when the growth hormone gets too high or the IGF-1 gets too high, then your hypothalamus says, done. I'm not, I don't need to create as big of a spike. So it keeps your negative feedback loop intact, which is a little bit different than the growth hormone peptides, the growth hormone releasing peptides like hexarelin and ipamorelin, which just they hit what's called the ghrelin receptor, which is the hunger receptor. And so it tonically increases the growth hormone. So you can get super physiologic on that, or MK677 is another one, which is just a pill, but it's actually not a peptide. But that tonically increases the growth hormone, so you don't get the benefit of that negative feedback loop. You still have that pulsatile normal secretion when you're taking tesamorelin and sermorelin. And both of those are actually FDA approved. The tesamorelin was approved for HIV lipodystrophy, and we in medicine, about 30% of the medications that we prescribe are off label. So much like the GLPs. So initially they were for diabetes, people were losing weight. It's like, oh, we're going to give it to you for weight loss, even before it was indicated for it, right? And that's totally legal. So it's totally legal to prescribe testosterone and sermorelin because they're FDA approved. There's some other nuance around there that we don't need to get into, but in general.
You just mentioned that GLP has been around for a long time, right? And they're dealing with diabetics. And one comment you made earlier was they've kind of sat on these for a long time. So if this information, we've had these out here for a while, and so why now are they starting to release these? Why now is it starting to become more in the public eye? Like we know more about it now, as opposed to 10 years ago when a lot of people knew about the GLPs and they were using them for diabetics.
Well, I think having the being able to see a little bit more science, I think expands what people are comfortable with. When a medication first comes out, people are you want to test the waters. You want to put your toe in the water and see, is this something that I actually want to try? Are there going to be significant negative side effects, long-term side effects, things like that? So the adoption by physicians, it definitely takes time. But then you start getting pressure from the end user, from the consumer, from the patient that says, hey, I'd like to try that, especially I'd like to try it for weight loss. And so I think that we're living more in a day and age where people have more access. You mentioned it earlier. We have more access to data. We've got AI. We've got podcasts like this. We've got social media. So I think that the consumer started pushing this a little bit more, especially from a weight loss standpoint. Honestly, I think that most people probably care less that it reduces inflammation and cardiovascular events. But if I can fit in that nice dress, then I want it, right? If I can look better on the beach, then I want it. But so I think that's why. And then the science has continued to progress. And so semaglutide was the first one that was available. And I don't know if you know this, but this was actually extracted from the Gila monster, from the saliva of the Gila monster.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff in medicine. We've got a really good antihypertensive that's from the venom of a pit viper. So there's a lot of stuff in medicine that is from it's a peptide that's out there in nature. So the Gila monster eats very few times in a year, and they're like, well, why in the hell is that? Well, they've got high amounts of GLP-1, and so then they were able to extract that from the saliva, and then we're able to make it. Now, we naturally make GLP-1 and we make GIP, which is in the second. So there's this semaglutide, which was the first generation. Then you have tirzepatide, which is the second generation that added a GIP, a glucose-dependent insulinotrope. And then you've got retatrutide, which isn't approved yet, but it adds glucagon. So it has a third metric that reduces hepatic liver fat. So at any rate, but the weight loss has increased with each one of those. We naturally make GLP and GIP. It's naturally made in the intestine when you have a glucose load inside the intestine. But the naturally occurring GLP and GIP, it's gone within a couple minutes. There's an enzyme that destroys it within a couple minutes. It's a natural process that body has, so we don't get too much of it. But they were able to make the synthetic forms of it resistant to that enzyme. So you have to only take it once a week. And so the science has continued to progress, which is kind of my point.
Yeah, I don't know. I find all this extremely interesting, and kind of going back to your comments about behavior. That's what I find the most interesting about this is the behavioral aspect of things. And this is what I was actually thinking about earlier is I've realized just based on a lot of people I know that are taking GLPs and other type of peptides, things like that, is that the one thing that is, I shouldn't say it's undefeated, but it's extremely hard to beat is the habitual things, right? Once you create that habit, it's almost like it doesn't really matter what you put in your body, you're going to respond to that behavior. So even if you're taking GLPs and you're like, oh, I'm not as hungry anymore. But if every time I come home, I have a beer because that's just what I habit stack. I come home, I grab a beer. I come home, I grab a beer. It doesn't matter what kind of GLP, whether you're hungry or not, you just do that. So I'm wondering, have you noticed the same type of thing with peptides, like BBC 157 or any of those in terms of like you said, like you can take those, what's the CJ7? What's the one with the,
CJC 1295 is a growth hormone secretagogue that increases your growth hormone. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's that type of thing. I mean, you're still going to have to get out there and you're still really going to have to put a lot of intention into the workouts. You can't just take it, show up and be like, boom, I'm jacked.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So yeah, that gets into a whole psychology of human behavior and habit breaking. You're totally right. If you've got a bad habit, you need to supplant it with one that's better and continue to show up and do it. And that's the consistency. So workout routines, and you know this better than anyone, whether it's a HIIT program, whether it's resistance training or zone 2 cardio or whatever it is, it's a consistency. Like if you can, the hardest piece of equipment at the gym is just the front door. Mm-hmm. Right? It's getting in there and doing it. And you don't necessarily have to go to a gym. You can do bands, you can do weights at home, you can go hill running. You don't have to go to a gym. But it's the consistency with which you do that. So if you make that a habit, one of my bad habits is actually just housing food. Like if I'm watching TV at night, I'll just house some food. It's ridiculous. And many times I'm not even that hungry, but I can house some food. So it's a matter of trying to break that habit. But yeah, that's getting into psychology of trying to replace one habit that's not as healthy for you with something that is healthy for you, and maybe going to the gym at that time. Or doing something active, get out and walk. But you're right. You're spot on though with the growth hormone secretagogues. If you don't work out, it's not going to do anything. It's really not going to do anything. Same thing taking protein. Like if you're hitting your 1.6 grams per kilogram of protein and you're not working out, yeah, you're not really going to gain much muscle mass. So everything has to be done in combination.
And you were mentioning, obviously, when people get off GLP-1s, if they don't change those habits, then, of course, they're going to gain some weight back. Is there any other long-term risks that we still don't know about, even with some of these other peptides?
Boy, that's a great question. We just don't know because we haven't been studying these in humans very much. And so thymosin alpha-1 is one that's been studied. In other countries, they use it for hepatitis, and it really seems to be a immune modulator that works exceedingly well. We just don't do it here. It's not approved in the U.S. And there are other peptides that have been used, like the thymosin beta-4 that we talked about, been used in. There's heart attack models where it actually shows that you heal better from a heart attack. The cardiomyocytes migrate better. But until we actually get some longer term studies, but studies that are actually multi-center where you get a lot of patients, we're really not going to be able to know. So to answer your question about the GLPs, the side effect really seems to be rebound. Now, semaglutide had intestinal slowing and nausea and all that stuff. With the second and third generations, don't seem to be as bad with that. But long term, is there a problem? We don't know. And with the other ones, we really don't know. And the sourcing now can be a real issue because if you have multiple, you've got 20 different sources that people are getting BPC from, and you're running a study on that, like, well, how pure is each one of those, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of variables that we need to reduce down to where the patient is the only variable with a defined metric or a few metrics that we're looking at. And then you could at least run some regression analyses on something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a two-part question. I'm sorry, a two-part question to this. So with all the research that you've done and everything that you're continuing to do, what are you concerned the most about and what excites you the most about peptides?
I'm concerned the most right now about where people are sourcing their peptides and either saying that they work or they don't work, or having adverse, especially injection site reactions, because the sourcing now is just the wild, wild west. And it's not being helped right now with everything being in a gray area. So to get to the regulatory, and I answer the second part of the question in a second, to get to the regulatory, the FDA takes advice from this thing called the Pharmacy Compound Advisory Committee. And that's 12 people. It's now 12 people. It used to be fewer, but now 12 people, and most of them are a good portion of them are peptide friendly. They just met on July 23rd and 24th and recommended that BPC, TB500, KPV, MOTC all get it. They advise the FDA that they should be endorsed or placed on category 1. The FDA has the final say so. They could take that advice and say, yeah, 2 thumbs up, we're going to do that. Or they could tell them to pound sand and we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. Now you've got the HHS secretary RFK is sitting above all them, and he's very pro-peptide, right? So right now we're not sure where we're going with this, right? And without that clear designation, that makes me the least happy. I'd like to have stuff that's in category 1 FDA. It doesn't have to be FDA approved, but at least category 1, where compounding pharmacies can legally make this and we can run studies that are legitimate. Now it's just, can I find this compounding pharmacy to make this type of deal? It's almost like you're whispering to your buddies, you know what I'm saying? And so it that gray market thing really makes me a little nervous, right? But what makes me excited is that we are now looking at this, and the combination of this and biologics like PRP, bone marrow aspirate, we're going to be able to do things that we were once able to just do with surgery. So we did a study, this published in 23, maybe 22. We looked at a particular type of partial rotator cuff tear and compared surgical results to using a type of PRP. And the PRP patients, they at 6 months, they were all doing really well, but the PRP patients got there quicker without surgery. And so then we started applying it to other areas, other tendons and ligaments as well. So I think that our ability to harness our native, natural, biologic healing processes, whether it's through biologics like PRP or bone marrow aspirate, stem cells, and then the addition of the peptides to help drive that a little bit more, that's what I'm really excited about. And I'm excited about the fact that so many people really seem to be interested in their own health. And, what can I do? Now, usually the biggest question is, hey, what supplement can I take? Right. You get that. I'm sure you get that all the time. What supplement do I take to do this? Well, supplements can be helpful, but typically the supplements, getting super physiologic on a supplement is probably not going to help you that much. It's probably going to decrease something else. So if you get a micronutrient assay and you find out, oh gosh, my methylated folate's in the toilet, you need to supplement with that. But other than that, it's going to be more behaviors. But the fact that people are really wanting to hone in on and maybe it's like specific exercises. What can I do to improve my health span and longevity? Well, here's the things that you can do in a graded order,
Yeah.
I'm sure you guys are excited about that as well. Hence the podcast, right?
For sure.
What are you most excited about? What are you guys most excited about?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think I'm just excited for the potential. It's like that's why I was excited to get on this podcast with you, because I haven't done a ton of research on it. Like I was thinking about like experimenting with some of my own too, so that way we're able to coach clients through as they're talking about it. So I don't know. I think I need to reflect on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I get excited just because I'm always trying to think like, how can I optimize my health? Because there's as much knowledge I have, and as much I still struggle through things as well. You mentioned like late night eating type of thing. I mean, there's a lot of things that I do that I know that I can improve on. So anytime there's something that comes out there that I'm like, oh man, I can take this or I can do this to improve my lifestyle, because ideally I want to live till like I'm 100 plus. And not just like struggle through those last 20. I want to be like 105 and people are like, you're 105 years old. Are you kidding me? Like I want to be at that level. And so I'm always trying to think, okay, like what can I do just to improve my life just a little bit better so I can feel better, look younger, function better, be stronger. And so anytime there's things out there that I can say, hey, this could potentially add not just longer life, longevity to your life, but an improved quality of your life. Like I'm all about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've got a lot of data on that now. The biggest lever that you can pull, the number one lever, is going to be your VO2 max. So for every 3.5 increase in your VO2 max, you have a 15% decrease in your all-cause mortality. That's cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, cardiovascular diseases. And how do you improve your VO2 max? HIIT training is the quickest and easiest way to do it. And so, but that requires you to be intentional in doing those things. Something else that doesn't get a lot of press is the social aspect of it. Like if you look at the blue zones, yes, they walk up and down hills and they tend to eat more of a Mediterranean type diet with probably a little less saturated fat, but they don't eschew meats. I mean, they still eat meat, which I think is good. I mean, I'm more of an omnivore myself, but they're very social, right? They get out and do things with people, and the social interaction really matters from a cognitive standpoint.
Yes.
It improves your memory. Volunteering improves cognitive ability. So there's a lot of things that you can do socially that aren't monetized. And so that's why I don't think they really get a lot of press. And sleep. Sleep's kind of boring to talk about, but getting quality sleep, I mean, it's maybe the number one thing from a cognitive standpoint. And that's where no one wants to get dementia, right? No one wants to get forgetful, but sleep is when our brain rids itself of all these tau bodies and beta amyloid and all that stuff. The lymphatic system, that's the only time it really works is during sleep. And so if you're not getting good quality sleep, and that's honestly where alcohol comes in, that fragments your sleep. And so is there a role and time for alcohol? Yeah, it's probably social, and you can do some of that socially, but on a daily basis, probably not. So there's, again, it's getting back to the levers that have to be, and you have to be intentional about. So, but there are, like, if you were wanting to compete in bodybuilding and you wanted to take a growth hormone secretagogue for a while, I think it's a very reasonable thing to do. You got an end goal and you want to give it a try. You just have to understand that it's going to increase your insulin resistance a little bit. Growth hormone does that, right? And you remember a guy named, I think it was David Palumbo. You ever hear of Palumbo belly?
No, I have not.
Oh yeah. So this guy, he was taking HGH, and so he was a bodybuilder, and so they called it Palumbo belly because the human growth hormone would cause the organs to increase in size as well. So you'd have this really muscular guy with low fat, I mean very low body fat, but just a huge belly, and they called it Palumbo belly because your liver gets bigger with the growth hormone, right? And then it makes you insulin resistant, and so they would stack insulin on top of that. So you can go overboard with anything, but a little bit of that stuff really does. I mean, you get increase in lean muscle mass. So I think that there's a role for these things. I think more so in injury recovery and in surgical recovery. I think that's where they really shine, and as a bridge to help you get into some better behavior patterns, right?
Yep.
Not supplanting them.
Yeah. But Dr. Spencer, man, I really appreciate it. This has been so interesting. I know Mackenzie and I have been really looking forward to this. And I know a lot of our clients, as well as a lot of our audiences, has been very interested in peptides in general. So we really appreciate your time.
Sure. Yeah. My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Where can people find you if they want to learn more? Or I know you mentioned your site that you're coming out with in the next few weeks or months.
So I'm joining a practice down in Texas, Executive Medicine of Texas. And so should be starting up there probably in about a month. So, and I think we're probably going to do some podcasts down there as well on peptides, but that'll be a way that you could contact me is through those guys down there. So I'm looking forward to that. That'll be fun. Performance medicine should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have to have you on again, and you can tell us all about all the performance medicine. We kind of briefly talked about that off camera. Is super interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that can be done there. So anyhow, well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.